So I'm kind of curious, how many people remember having a black and white television? Yeah, most of us, right? Yeah, it's because most of us are old, right? If we've had black and white televisions, we know that black and white televisions, things don't look as good as they do now. Like these guys are 82-inch TVs, right? They weigh less than my 30-inch TV used to, right? Sort of thing. And what's kind of funny is that, you have not been able to purchase a newly manufactured black and white television since at least 2009 because of certain regulation changes that kind of happened unrelated to black and white TVs. You can't buy them anymore. Not that there's this huge, demand for them, sort of thing. But it's funny, they've been gone for years, but they actually have a lasting impact. Now, as you guys know, or many of you know, that I'm a pretty big pro football fan. I really like the NFL. Did you know that the NFL still has rules that are tied to black and white television? If you ever watch an NFL game, you'll notice that with a few exceptions for special games, the players always have a light jersey on one team and a dark jersey on the other. The rule is that the home team gets to pick which color they wear. Normally they pick the darker jersey, the team color. And without special exemption by the commissioner, the other team has to wear the opposite color. Why is that rule there? So when you watch on black and white TVs, you know which team you're rooting for. Is that guy on my side or is he on the other side? Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? Is he with me or is he against me? And although very helpful to have that information when watching a sporting event, unfortunately, I think we live in a time where that kind of thinking has flowed over into everything. That we have a tendency to look at the world around us in very absolute terms. Is this a yes or no situation? Do I stay or do I go? Is he a Republican or is he a Democrat? Is he good or is he bad? Where black and white mechanisms work well for sporting events, they really get in the way when we try to live a life that really impacts the lives of those around us and live a life that actually is meaningful and impactful. Now, as you recall, we're in a series called Unstuck. And our focus here is looking at the reasons in our lives where we sometimes just get stuck, that we just kind of have some emotional issue or something going on where we can't really seem to move past it. And I can say with confidence that one of the reasons we can commonly get stuck is beginning to see situations in absolute terms. Right? I mean, just to kind of reference it, you've probably heard on the news that there was a shooting killing 10 people in Buffalo. Now, in that case, it was literally because he was white and they were black. Right? But also it comes down to the fact that there is violence and anger constantly going on over absolutism, sometimes race, sometimes other things. And I think what we need to do as the people of God, what we are called to do is not get caught up in that. And it can be on large social issues where we feel like we're pressured to just decide on absolutely on one side or absolutely on another side. But it also can fill our individual lives where we get under pressure and we feel like we just have to choose among absolutes. And what we need to do is set the pace, right? When there's pressure to suddenly decide, which one is it? Are you here or are you there? That we don't give in to that pressure. That we step back and we take time. Because it is not uncommon for a scenario to appear absolute. But often, if we will take time, if we will slow down, and we will evaluate what's going on, there's usually other options. But the key to doing that is slowing down enough to think through the options, to not be caught up in the wave of emotion or the wave of pressure, often pressure that is artificial, although feels extremely real in the moment. We've got to settle it down. So now as we talk about this issue, and as we wrap up our series today, I want to again look at another narrative from the book of John. And again, this is a very, very familiar story, possibly even more familiar than the one we looked at last week. And so what I wanted to do was, again this week, take a look at the theatrical representation of it. Let's look at the story, kind of a short little 2-minute clip that represents the story, and then we'll talk about it. Now, in this case, the clip comes from a mini-series called The Bible. It was on the History Channel about 10 years ago. Right. So let's take a look at the video, and then we'll talk about it.
Mary, over here. Yay! The law commands us to stone such a woman. What do you say?
I'll give my stone to the first man who tells me that he has never sinned. Go and sin no more.
Thank you.
Now, you probably recognize that story from the common title that it's given, The Woman Caught in Adultery. But I kind of feel like if we look at what's really going on in that video or in that narrative, a better name might be the day the religious leaders were willing to destroy a person's life to get what they wanted. Because that is the key part of that story. Because as we look at that narrative, you know, and it's commonly referenced as a great example of Jesus' compassion and his forgiveness, and it is absolutely those things. It is absolutely those things. But what the main thing going on there is that the religious leaders saw Jesus as a threat to their power. That they decided the way to get control of things was to exploit religion. Right? That they focused on rules. And we've talked about this in other messages where they literally took what starts as the Ten Commandments and grew it into literally 600 plus rules. And then when you actually kind of tried to match them up and kind of put all the interpretations together, it literally came down to thousands of regulations that no one could understand except them. Because the way to maintain power was to convince people that they were appealing to religion and those rules. And then Jesus comes along and says that these guys kind of misunderstand that relationship with God is personal. And it's about building that personal relationship. And that began to undermine their power. Right? Because where these guys said, the way you show love for God, the religious leaders said that the way you show love for God is by conforming to religious practices. Jesus says, no, the way you show love for God is by loving one another, by caring for one another. That will show that you love God. So let's walk through the narrative and let's just kind of see kind of all the stuff that's inside there. So this encounter between Jesus and these religious leaders occurs early in the morning one day, and he's in the area of the temple, and he's teaching. And of course, what that means is that he's teaching kind of on their turf, and they feel they need to put a stop to this. So as the narrative begins, as Jesus was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. So these men are so upset, so angry about this woman's behavior that they feel like this moment is right now. That we're going to drag her out here, throw her on the ground, and point out how bad she is and demand that she's punished. Do we think that that's actually what's happening? This just happened to go down at the moment when Jesus is teaching, right in the temple area? No. The religious leaders had plotted this. They were up to no good. Because there's a lot of evidence that that's the case. I mean, first of all, what is she accused of? Can you do that by yourself? No, right? And the law that they were pointing to, demanded that both people be punished. Yet they brought no one else. Also, that same law that they were pointing to required that 2 or more people be eyewitnesses to the event. Do you think they were doing what they were doing in public? Given the social pressure around that issue at that time, combined with the penalty. It is literally a life or death matter, right? They would have been off in private. And for all that to happen at this exact moment where they could do it and call Jesus out onto the mat, this is a setup. This is entirely a setup. So these religious leaders are in on it. They have somehow put witnesses together. They possibly have even drawn in the person that she was with to be part of setting her up so they could set him up. But whatever the case, those involved are guilty of a crime themselves because they're willing to potentially kill her to get rid of him. Now, I'm sure they justified their actions as serving some greater good. I mean, after all, Jesus was messing up the religious system. And that means that they might lose their power, and that's wrong, right? So we're going to stand up for what's right. Sure, we do some wrong things along the way as we go, but we're serving a greater good. They're just our casualties sometimes, and sometimes you have to bend the rules to protect what you think is important. I'm sure that's how they felt. And you know what? Sometimes that's how I think sometimes. I think a lot of us think that way sometimes. That as we look around and we see someone doing things that are wrong, we can be so quick to condemn them. But then when we do something that we know is kind of wrong, but I had good reason for it. And, sure, I make mistakes sometimes, and I do this thing or that thing. But you got to understand that we all fall short from time to time, and, I'm trying to get it better. And that's certainly true, but all I'm saying is that maybe we should just cut other people the same slack we cut ourselves. That as we look at the fact that we all make mistakes, we all get things wrong sometimes. And let's just be willing to give other people the same space that we expect people to give us. Now, for this woman, whatever the case, her life is on the line right now, right? She is literally facing a horrible, horrible death. And so as she's there dealing with all that, the religious leaders address Jesus, and they say, "Teacher." Now keep in mind, when they start out with teacher, they're feigning respect for him. Oh, you're so learned. We just want to know what you think about this difficult issue we're facing right now. Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says stone her. What do you say? Now, this was a carefully orchestrated event to put Jesus into a no-win situation, to force him into choosing between black or white, yes or no, when there was no good answer. Now, how does this question do that? Remember that Jesus had come to fulfill the law. He said he was of God, so of course he would keep God's laws. And what the law says here is clear. It's Deuteronomy chapter 17. It's right there, what's supposed to happen. But Jesus also had a reputation for compassion, for loving, for forgiveness. So which way does he go? Because he loses in either case. Right? If he says, don't stone her, then he's violating Mosaic law. He's basically saying, don't follow the law that I've come to fulfill. And also, we have to remember too that the temple actually had its own security force. And they could arrest you for violating Mosaic law. So they could have arrested him for that. But now what if he says, yes, stone her? What happens then? Well, that reputation for compassionate and loving is not going to go so well. He's going to lose that. But also, he could be arrested by Rome, because only Rome is allowed to execute. And there was such a crime as inciting an execution. So basically, they were trying to put Jesus in a place where he would both lose reputation and be arrested. And as much as it might seem that maybe they were really concerned about right or wrong, what was good or bad, what was doing what was right, the text is really clear that's not the case. It says they were trying to trap Jesus into saying something they could use against him. They are trying to put Jesus into a black or white, no-win situation. And notice how Jesus deals with this. Right? As they push him into this scenario, they are presenting only two options. And on the surface, it appears that there are only two options. But notice what Jesus does. Jesus stooped down, wrote in the dust with his finger. What's he doing? People often kind of speculate about what he wrote and so forth. If it was important, we would have been told. The thing that's important is he's resetting the pace. They are pressuring him to saying, what's your decision? What is it? Which way do we go? And he takes time to think, to process it. Because the thing we want to remember is that they are appealing to the law. He knew the law better than they did. So he takes time to think it through. And basically, he ignores them for however long it takes for him to be ready to answer. Basically, the pressure of the situation was trying to take control out of his hands. And he didn't let that happen. That he maintained control by managing the pace. And how often does that happen in our own lives, where we're in a moment, it's not an ideal moment, it feels like there is only two choices available, you got to pick one and they're both terrible. And the pressure is significant. And maybe someone's pressuring you to answer. Maybe you just feel kind of internal pressure to answer. And so often what happens when we're dealing with a difficult situation like that, where both answers feel bad, sometimes we'll just kind of pick one. You know what? I just want to be done with this decision. I'll just pick one. But what happens? That decision we make so quickly so we can be done with it often leads to an outcome we have to live with for years. And what Jesus is doing is taking a little bit of time up front to avoid a long-term problem. And I think it's a great model for us to kind of recognize that. But as the religious leaders continued to apply pressure to Jesus, Jesus took his time, and because he took his time, because he set the pace, he did not let the circumstances set his pace. He realizes that there is another option. All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Right? So he turns the question back to his accusers. Okay, you think the answer here is just so clear? You decide. But before you do that, take a look at yourself. If you were laying out here, fully exposed, at the very worst moment of your life, how would you hold up to this standard? Consider that before what you do decide what to do to her in the very worst moment of her life. And it turns out that not only is he making that general point so well, he actually makes a really specific point. Remember that he knows the law even better than they do. And to carry out this sentence, the law requires 2 witnesses. Right? And if it requires 2 witnesses, and we've already determined that this is a setup, those witnesses are in on it. You know what else the law says? The 2 witnesses have to throw the first stones. So in other words, if you want to carry on this execution, first admit your guilt in this setup and throw the first stone. And of course, that would mean they've admitted to their own crime. And with that, we know what happens. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Jesus' refusal to allow the pressure of the moment to dictate his answer allowed him to find an answer that wasn't there, or that wasn't obvious. And I think there are kind of 2 key things that we can take away from this. I mean, the obvious one here is that let's not be so quick to judge other people. People have dark, terrible moments in their lives. We all do. None of us would want to be on public display at that worst moment in our life. And so as you see someone or you experience someone who is in that kind of moment, we just don't want to be so quick to judge. We want to give them some space. And imagine if we just did that. Imagine if the only change we made in our lives was that we're going to say that, you know what? I realize this is a bad moment in your life. I'm not going to measure your whole life by this moment. I think what I'll do instead is focus on maybe how I'm struggling with similar issues and maybe how I can be different there. But also, Jesus gives us this kind of incredible life lesson over just avoiding black and white thinking, just binary thinking. It's either this option or this option. Because reality is that in life, we face situations where it feels commonly like there are only 2 choices. I mean, if you're unhappy at work, what are the options? Do you suffer through or do you quit? Right? Or you're listening to someone go on about politics. What are the options? Do you tell them off or you just grind your teeth? Right? Or if you're feeling stressed out, do I have a few drinks so I can relax? Or do I just white knuckle it to get through? Right? It seems like there are all cases where there are only 2 options. And what I have found is that the louder the noise is in the moment, sometimes it's a literal noise, sometimes it's emotional noise, the louder that noise is, the more I feel like there are only 2 choices in this situation. But if we can take a minute, there's almost always at least one more option. I mean, a practice that I have tried to implement in my life, I don't do it consistently, but I am trying to do it consistently, is that anytime I find myself in a situation where there are only 2 options, don't decide until you can at least identify a third option. Now, I don't always take that third option. I still may go with one of the first 2, but taking the time to say, what else is there besides these 2 things? Begin to gain a deeper understanding of the situation. So again, looking at the examples of like unhappy at work. Do you suffer through or do you quit? Well, maybe we can ask a question first. Why are we unhappy at work? What is it about your work that makes you unhappy? Could you deal with that one issue? Is there a solution to that issue? And staying would be okay in that case. Or maybe you like the company you work for, you just don't like that job. Is there another job you could take? You know, or the idea of the political rant, which is so common now, right? Do you tell the person off, or do you just kind of grit your teeth and put up with it? Well, I mean, one possibility is, could you talk to the person and possibly better understand their point of view, and maybe they'd better understand yours. Now, I recognize in our current political environment, that's a long shot sometimes. All right, that's kind of a long shot. But you can remove yourself, or turn the TV off, right, or turn the radio off, right, and get away from it. You know, and the issue of feeling stressed out and just trying to get away from that with chemicals or alcohol, right, that identify the cause of stress. You know, and is there something you can do to get away from the cause of stress? In other words, is there an answer where we deal with the source of the stress instead of trying to numb the outcome from the stress? I mean, I know that in my life, this practice has helped save me from some seriously bad decisions. Because so often when we choose quickly, we have regrets. But if we'll set the pace, if we will not let the pressure of the moment force us to make a decision too fast, we can avoid that. Just take that time to identify another option, at least one more option before you decide. But, you know, at this point in my life, I'm 56 years old. I've already made a lot of bad decisions. Kind of adding up at this point in my life. Right? And I have regrets, and we all have regrets. And we've all made decisions that have hurt people. We've all done things that have hurt people. And we wish we hadn't done those things. So what do we do in that case? What do we do if we've already at that point where I already made that decision that has left me regretful? Is there any hope for me? And the good news is, yes, because Jesus has an answer for that as well. Right? Because as this woman, having gone through the pain that she's in this moment, cowers in fear, judged by everyone, fearful for her life, again, at the darkest, scariest, worst moment of her life, on display for everyone to see. Her whole life is literally on a billboard in that town at that moment. Jesus approaches her, and he says, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." So Jesus is saying that, yes, I know what you've done. I know you've done things that you regret. You have taken actions that have hurt people and have hurt yourself. But I don't hold those against you. But also, don't continue on this path. Make the changes you need to make to not be here again. In other words, leave that behavior behind. The religious word for that is repent, right? To actually move away from your behavior. That word literally, the Greek word that we translate as repent, literally means to turn and walk the other way. And that's what Jesus was asking her to do. And that's what Jesus asks each of us to do, right? To acknowledge our failings, acknowledge where we've gotten things wrong. And again, to use a religious word, acknowledge our sins. Confess those sins to God. But then embrace his forgiveness. Recognize that it is there. But then leave those behaviors behind. Because just as in our narrative, just as the work of Jesus set her free, the work of Jesus' death and resurrection sets all of us free. And all Jesus is asking us to do is accept that. Acknowledge to him where we've gotten it wrong, accept that he forgives us for it, and walk forward in a renewed life. And then live that out in a way where we don't let the pressure of the world around us force us between one side or the other. Getting caught up in political narratives or other ugly narratives that take us off the mission of being the loving presence of God in this world. I believe if we can do that, we will truly be part of making our town and our world a far better place. But we have to choose to do that.